Session 35 of the Law of One, and we have more information about polarization, but now from the standpoint of certain historical figures. Let's begin. We have a very short session today because we are only covering 8 questions. That's the length of the session. There's a couple of them, like I mentioned probably at the beginning of book 2, that are very short, and that's why book 2 of the Law of One was shorter than the other ones. But in any case, we have questions that are about polarization, the catalyst and the experience that it's giving. There's a little bit of how we can see how the higher self acts in terms of creating catalysts for us. So, while the historical figures, they have their history, we can use them as a frame of reference. There is the most important part, of course, is the metaphysical aspects of their incarnation here and how they were able to use that for their spiritual evolution or soul evolution, depending on how you want to see it. So we're going to start with the first question of the session, where Don is asking, I would like to say, he's first saying, I would like to say that we consider this a great privilege to be doing this work and hope that we are going to question in a direction that will be of value to the readers of this material. This session, I thought that possibly inspecting the effect on the rays of different well-known figures in our history might be of help in understanding how the catalyst of illusion creates spiritual growth. He keeps on going and says, I was making a list here, and the first I thought we might possibly hit the high points on as to the effect of catalyst of the individual's work in life would be the one we know as Franklin D. Roosevelt. Could you say something about that entity? Well, before we start, just a couple of things that I want to say. Here we can see why the raw content was so pristine, and it was because Don's intentions, or everybody's intention, obviously, but we can see it through Don's questions, that he was very much concerned with material that was helpful, for the purpose of soul evolution. So, instead of asking, how did this person do this or that, transient questions about, the life of somebody, he would use somebody's life as a reference to see how their choices help them polarize or depolarize, as we'll see in general. So just wanted to praise that from Don, because thanks to that, he was able to maintain the contact pure, if you will. So now they're asking about Franklin D. Roosevelt, the President of the United States. And Ross says, it is to be noted that in discussing those who are well known among your peoples, there is the possibility that information may be seen to be specific to one entity, whereas in actuality, the great design of experience is much the same for each entity. It is with this in mind that we would discuss the experiential forces which offered catalysts to an individual. It is further to be noted that in the case of those entities lately incarnate upon your plane, much distortion may have taken place in regard to misinformation and misinterpretation of an entity's thoughts or behaviors. So, of course, they're making their introduction here as to how they're going to present, the information. And when they say, they basically say, when we talk about your peoples, there's a possibility that, the information may be seen like specific to an entity, but in reality, it works for everybody in essence. The soul evolution is for everybody, and everybody's seeking the same thing. We're all seeking the one creator, right? So it may seem like, it's very specific to the individual, like the things that happen, but in reality, all of that, this illusory aspect of the things that happen are seeking the same thing, is what they're saying. So they say, it is with this in mind that we are going to discuss the experiential forces, basically, the things that happen to the individual. It is further to be noted that in the case of those entities lately incarnate upon your plane, much distortion may have taken place in regard to misinformation, misinterpretation of an entity's thoughts or behavior. So I would say that this is the late incarnation, or the place where we are now in society. May cause a lot of misinformation and misinterpretation of somebody's thoughts and behaviors, and we can see this in history, of course. As things have exacerbated, we tend to have a not very clear view of the person per se. So I believe that's what they mean here. So in any case, they continue on, and it's a long answer, so I'll make pauses when needed. So Ra says, we shall now proceed to, shall we say, speak of the basic parameters of the one known as Franklin Roosevelt. When any entity comes into third density incarnation, each of its energy centers is potentiated but must be activated by the self using experience. The one known as Franklin developed very quickly up through red, orange, yellow, and green, and began to work in the blue-ray energy center at a tender age, as you would say. So, when you come into incarnation, all your energy centers are potentiated. It's like, you get plugged in, and all your energy centers are there, potentiated, but you need to activate them. You need to push the buttons, and those buttons are through experiences, and there is a catalyst or experience that offers catalyst. And that is the essence of our incarnation, how we respond to this catalyst. And a lot of the catalyst is programmed, so we have the capacity and the ability to activate these energy centers and move on depending on the programming that we had. So this is where things go awry. Like Ra has mentioned in the past, that the catalyst is supposed to activate something, and it does something completely different because we, with our perception, kind of twist it. So they said that Franklin Roosevelt developed very quickly up through red, orange, yellow, green. So it had a pretty good childhood, I guess, in terms of using the catalyst for its growth. So that's as basic as it can get. I don't want to complicate it even further. So that's it. We have energy centers that are activated, and so the experiences that we have through those energy centers are specific for the type of evolution or type of experiences we want to have to create a sort of understanding, or I wish I had a synonym for experience that is that powerful, but it's like the database, the data that we're going to get from the experience is what our higher self wants to collect. Let's put it that way. And our higher self being us, of course, from another dimension. 6th density, to be specific to you guys. So, who know? Sometimes I kind of adapt to the audience that I'm talking to, and people don't know about density, so I try to speak in ways that, most people can understand, but densities, we know that. Anyhow, with that out of the way, Ra continues and says, this rapid growth was due, firstly, to previous achievements in the activation of these rays, secondly, to the relative comfort and leisure of its early existence, thirdly, due to the strong desire upon the part of the entity to progress. This entity mated with an entity whose blue-ray vibrations were of a strength more than equal to its own, thus acquiring catalyst for further growth in that area that was to persist throughout the incarnation. So, a couple of things we can see here from Frank. We'll call him Frank. This, like I said, he had a pretty good childhood. They said, thanks to the relative comfort and leisure of its early existence, so his childhood was pretty good. That was, but firstly was the achievements. Firstly, to previous achievements in the activations. So pre-incarnatively, his or from other incarnations, he came with a very well developed energy centers. They have been activated previously. Then, of course, childhood helped that a lot. Thirdly, they say he had a strong desire, which is going to play a big role into what they have to say further. So, these were all very helpful for him to activate and energize these energy centers. And then they say that the entity made it with somebody whose Blu-ray vibrations were of a strength more than equal to its own. If you remember from our previous discussions on sexual energy transfer, you know that someone who is above green ray can help in the transfer of this energy or this catalyst for growth to the other one, as long as that other person is at least green ray. So you are receptive of that energy, and thus somebody who is stronger than you in Blu-ray or indigo can transfer that to you and give you that catalyst in sexual energy transfer. Well, this also plays a role, obviously, not only in sexual energy transfer, which is limited to mated pairs, but also to interactions with somebody else. Of course, that was his wife, as we'll find out. But I don't want to assume that it was only through sexual energy transfer. I don't believe that's the only way, obviously, to transfer energy. It's this is something that happens. I mean, you can see, when you were a kid, I don't know how you said it in English, but when you were a kid, you wouldn't want to hang out, or your parents told you not to hang out, with I forgot how we even said it in Spanish. You don't want to hang out with the tough kids, or with the bad kids. Bad influence, we call it. So whatever. The point is that when you hang out with certain people, you tend to develop their own behaviors. You tend to mimic their behaviors and start acting like them. So you buy into their views of the world. So the same thing happens, when we hang out with people who are higher consciousness. This is why, of course, you want to, as you have a spiritual awakening or a consciousness expansion, or you simply, start a path of self-realization, you will note that you no longer want to hang out with people who have a lower consciousness. Again, this probably sounds terrible to people who see it that way, but it is how it is. If you're looking at life, from a perspective of misery and survival and manipulation and all this nonsense, then you are seeing through the lower lenses of consciousness. Consciousness being a whole unity. So you're not seeing the higher aspects, whereas somebody who is in a higher state of consciousness can see everything from above. So there's a bigger picture, and that's why you tend to want to be around more people that are like you or with a higher consciousness. So that is, that's just our programming. We're all, like Ross said at the beginning of this answer, we all want that path. No matter how you see it, no matter how you want it, you can be a female, you can be a male, you can be a race, ethnicity, you can have, whatever kind of identities you want to have. You may have a disease, you may be super healthy, an athlete, successful in business or not, whatever. All of us are seeking the same thing. And that is our increase in consciousness. And by that, we need experience. And to that, we keep going. All right. Ra says, told you, it's a long answer. This entity had some difficulty with continued green ray activity due to the excessive energy which was put into the activities regarding other selves in the distortion towards acquiring power. This was to have its toll upon the physical vehicle, as you may call it. The limitation of the non-movement of a portion of the physical vehicle opened once again for this entity the opportunity for concentration upon the more, shall we say, universal or idealistic aspects of power, that is, the non-abusive use of power. So he encounters some difficulties in essence by continuing his growth. And see, from the lens of Ra, they're seeing, all right, what was his progress? All right, his childhood was fine, he activated this and that, got to green ray, and all of a sudden stopped. Okay, why did he stop? Well, he got involved with power. Of course, he's the president of the United States. What do you expect? I'm actually surprised, that a president of, a country. And, the US is a little ambiguous, depending on how you want to see it. I would say that up to World War II, it wasn't as terrible as it became, infiltrated over time. But, so I would say, yes, I mean, we're going to talk about Lincoln now. It's a beautiful person. And I don't know much about Lincoln, but you can just see, from this grand perspective. But yeah, in any case, Roosevelt was polarized towards the positive, of course, opened his heart, and just had difficulties in the future because of this acquisition of power, and he had to struggle with this. This is something that, you can go up with good intentions, just like Kennedy did, and, end up very affected by it. Kennedy didn't, and that's why they got rid of him. So, in this case, he got affected by this, acquisition of power over others, which is, inherent in the government system. I mean, there's no other way. It's like saying, I want to climb up the corporate ladder so I can be nice to employees. Not gonna happen. I am sorry. You are signing up to a corporation which doesn't care about people, cares about numbers. So it's a futile attempt. So in any case, so this had a toll upon his body. I believe he had polio. I'm really bad at American history because I wasn't raised here, so forgive me for that. But I think it was polio that he had, and he was paralyzed from the waist down. Or I know he wasn't very mobile. So whatever the case, this limitation of the non-movement of a portion of the physical body opened again, the possibility and opportunity to concentrate more on the universal. So they're talking about love, unconditional love, as opposed to, the more controlling side of power. So not much more in yellow, more in green is what they say here. We'll get more about his polio if I'm so tempted to just Google it right now, but I'm just gonna keep going. Whatever it is, you guys know it. All right, so Ross says, thus, at the outset of a bellicose action, this entity had lost some positive polarity due to the excessive use of the orange and yellow ray energies at the expense of green and blue ray energies. Then it had regained the polarity due to the catalytic effects of a painful limitation upon the physical complex. So you can see that, okay, so they say at the outset of a bellicose action, the war, this entity had lost some positive polarity because of excessive orange and yellow ray energies at the expense of green and blue. So this is natural to happen. I mean, if you're going to war, there is no decision that you can do it, from unconditional love. I'm sorry, and there is no honest expression of this other than, just saying, we're going to war, even if you have intentions, but you still depolarize. So you lose some polarity there, positive polarity. Then had regained the polarity due to catalytic effect and painful limitation upon the physical complex, because this was also part of the adjustment that the higher self had for him, which I'm not going to get ahead of myself, but yeah, that's what they're saying here. Ra continues, and last part of this answer. This entity was not of a bellicose nature, but rather, during the conflict, continued to vibrate in green ray, working with the blue ray energies. The entity who was the one known as Franklin's teacher also functioned greatly during this period as blue ray activator, not only for its mate, but also in a more universal expression. This entity polarized continuously in a positive fashion in the universal sense, while, in a less universal sense, developing a pattern of what you may call karma. This karma having to do with inharmonious relationship distortions with the mate teacher. So he wasn't very kind or something. I don't know. Like I said, I don't know history. I don't know what the relationship was between Franklin and Eleanor, I think her name was. I don't remember. But yeah, I mean, this happens. I mean, you lose polarization there, or actually develop karma in that sense. So, all right, but they say he wasn't of a bellicose nature. That wasn't his intention. So again, one may see this as somebody who got into power because he had really good intentions. He was a good person, but the war got in the way, and hey, it's the war, so you gotta do what you gotta do. The entity who was the one known as Franklin's teacher also functioned as a great functioned greatly during this period as Blu-ray activator, so helped a lot, and Franklin for that. Frankie. This entity polarized continuously into positive fashion, universal sense. So the result of his incarnation was of a I would say a more positive polarization, despite the fact that he went to war, not himself, of course, but he was involved in the war and so on. But you can see that his end result was of a positive, it seems, because he was also working in Blu-ray there. So I don't know. It's hard to tell like how much was he polarized before and now when he came, into incarnation again. So maybe it was more towards the positive. Maybe he didn't lose much. I don't know. But you can see that, despite, all the things that happened and having a bad relationship apparently with his wife, continue to, polarize in a positive way. So continuously in a positive fashion, yeah. So I know he died during the war, like right at the end. I think it was in April. And let's see, I think the war ended in just a couple of months after, or the month after. I forgot. Man, I'm mixing my history here, or not remembering well. But in any case, following General Patton's death, and how Ra described it as the ending of, say, an incarnation that, did what it had to do and just had to end it there, so he didn't lose more positive polarity. We can see maybe the same thing with Roosevelt here, because, he just died right at the end of the war, or, when it was really ending, just a couple of months before that. Actually, it was in August when it ended, but I'm thinking about, when Germany was taken over. But in any case, this is not a history class, thank goodness, because I like that. All right, so we go to the next question, which still, Don wants to know 2 things I would like to clear up. Then Franklin's teacher was his wife. Is this correct? We know that. This is correct, Ross says. Next question is, secondly, did Franklin place the limitation on his physical body himself? Ross says this is partially correct. The basic guidelines for the lessons and purposes of incarnation had been carefully set forth before incarnation by this mind-body-spirit complex totality. If the one known as Franklin had avoided the excessive enjoyment of or attachment to the competitiveness which may be seen to be inherent in the processes of its occupation, this entity would not have had the limitation. However, the desire to serve and to grow was strong in this programming, and when the opportunities began to cease due to these distortions towards love of power, the entity's limiting factor was activated. So, what do we have here? An entity who is positively polarized, and because of the incarnation experiences and the decisions that are taken, he got attached into and the enjoyment of competitiveness. Now, what is competitiveness? That is yellow ray. Could be a little bit orange ray, but mostly yellow ray, because you want to be superior than others. You are enjoying that. This doesn't mean that being superior to other in some senses. I mean, no, I'm not even going to talk about that. But being superior in the sense of wanting to be, because you see the other person as less, is actually the thing. Is it's not right, because what I wanted to put, and it can be argued and described and so on. if you want to be superior than somebody else because you think you can improve what the person is doing, say in a trade or some occupation, to me that's a healthy way of superiority. I mean, somebody's craftsmanship is superior than mine. That is fine, and it was probably based on somebody else. But in any case, not to discuss that and get into that different topic. This is the attachment and enjoyment of competitiveness, which obviously is of a depolarizing or even negative polarizing in that sense. So Roosevelt was very much into that. That caused for him to, which is, they say it was inherent of the processes of its occupation, what he was doing. So his higher self basically put the limitation there and said, because of his, and there's a really good point here when they say the desire to serve and to grow was strong in its programming. And when the opportunities began to cease because, distortions towards love of power were there, then this limiting factor was activated. So you have a programming that you want to follow. And if you don't follow that to the extent of, again, this path is always the same for everybody, which is polarizing towards a positive. That's what you come here to do. So when you don't do that, or something to that effect goes wrong, then things like this may happen. I'm not saying all of the things that happen is because of that, but something like this will happen. I can relate to this somewhat because when I read the competitiveness part, it reminded me to my powerlifting sort of amateur career that I started. And again, I wasn't doing it to be superior than anybody because I was really inferior by any standard. But I just feel that it wasn't my path. And so I developed a lot of physical limitations, which was, my back started giving out on me. And yeah, I mean, I accept it now. For years, I was so frustrated because my back was injured, or it would injure easily. And it was very weak to that degree, so I couldn't advance much. And, just not too long ago when I started learning all this, I said, well, guess what? Because of this, you didn't follow that path, and now you're here. So you can see that as a limitation placed there for me to concentrate on the important things, which to me is this. It's what I do. It's what I love doing. So, powerlifting career, bodybuilding careers, different animal, in my personal history, but, it wasn't what I was meant to do, and I can see it now clearly, where before, I didn't. So, here we go. Next question, 35.4. Continue on. Don says, I would now like to ask for the same type of information with respect to Adolf Hitler. You have given a little of this already. It is not necessary to recover what you have already given, but if you could complete that information, it would be helpful. Here we go, Adolf. In speaking of the one you call Adolf, we have some difficulty due to the intense amount of confusion present in this entity's life patterns, as well as the great confusion which greets any discussion of this entity. Here we see an example of one who, in attempting activation of the highest rays of energy while lacking the green ray key, cancel itself out as far as polarization either towards positive or negative. This entity was basically negative. However, its confusion was such that the personality disintegrated, thus leaving the mind-body-spirit complex unharvestable and much in need of healing. Here's a good place and time for me to correct something that I might have said in the past. I believe it was session 11, where I said that Hitler was positive, and I forgot that they had said this here, that he was basically negative. The reason why I said that he was positive is because his intentions, of course, as we'll see, and he was very confused with everything that happened in the end. But here they explain why he was confused. So again, he was negative. He was negatively oriented. I'm not sure what set him into that course, because that could be from previous incarnations, or it could be from just conscious decisions here. I don't know. There's a lot of confusion when it goes. There's a lot of misinformation when it comes to Hitler for so many reasons. I mean, I feel bad for Hitler, in a way, because his, or not Hitler, but the entity that was Hitler here is in a very confused state, and we'll get to that. But let's go little by little, because I think Hitler deserves this type of attention from a very unbiased point of view. And when I say unbiased, is because we're seeing it through the lens of the law of one. So I hope everybody's on board here with me. There's a lot of sensitivity when it comes to Hitler, so I don't know. I guess we still need to heal that from our collective consciousness trauma. But here goes my contribution to that healing. Alright, so they say that there was an intense amount of confusion present in this entity's life. And they say, there's a lot of difficulty, to talk about Hitler because of the life patterns that he had, as well as the amount of confusion that greets any discussion of this entity. First of all, Hitler is still considered like the most evil person in the world. And, okay, he earned his place there, I have to admit. But see, I want to bring up, and this is not, it's not a quantitative thing, but a qualitative aspect of this. And here's where, sensitive people will start banging at the table. But let's talk about Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan, we already know that polarized towards the negative. He was harvested. We have Himmler too, and Göring. I mean, I feel like Göring was probably even worse than Hitler, and he doesn't get that much attention in terms of, all the negativity and so on. But in any case, Genghis Khan, he was probably the most evil person in the world that I know of. The things that he did, his intentions, like he knew he had to be this miserable human being, and he did it joyful of it. He probably graduated with 110% service to self. I don't know, but see, the conception that we have of Genghis Khan is of a great conqueror. I mean, what? Sometimes you talk to historians and they praise him for the things that he did. So we have a very distorted perception of what is, and I mean, I just think this is laughable. But it's true. I've heard things about Genghis Khan that say, oh, well, he was brutal and he was all this and that. And we can see this over time in the Romans as well. There is a lot of romanticism and onto these figures that are evil people. What we humans consider evil. Through the law of one, we know there's no evil and so on. But we need polarity here to see what's good and what's evil, or hey, give me direction, right? So this is the confusion that I believe Ra is referring to here, because the discussion is that he's the most evil person in the world. However, we'll find out. I'll go back to that. But let's finish this paragraph. There's so much. Hitler also was involved in things, and this is to add to the negativity on Hitler, which, funny enough, is not said enough, and there are reasons for that, because he was involved in black magic, and he was involved in rituals, and this contact with intelligent infinity, actually with negative beings, not intelligent infinity. He wanted to achieve that, but he couldn't. But in any case, there's a lot of dark history about Hitler that nobody knows. It serves because nobody wants to talk about that in history, because that's irrelevant. It was relevant. All of that dark magic and how he summoned the powers that helped him, and the Thule Society, and all this obscure and occult aspect of the Nazi regime. This is really important, at least for us who are studying, the overall picture of, what happened in the 40s or in the 30s. This started happening in the 30s. Some people say that it started happening even in the 20s or even in the 1800s. Anyhow, there's so much to go into here, but let's keep going with the raw material. All right, so here we see an example, somebody activating higher energy centers basically lacking, green ray. So he lacked obviously green ray, and he tried to activate the higher energy centers, meaning indigo and crown chakra, or violet ray, either towards positive or negative. He canceled himself out because he couldn't polarize towards the positive, shutting the heart, and also, which we're going to cover in the negative as well. This entity was basically negative. We covered that already. However, the confusion was such that the personality disintegrated. Personality being his identity of self, this lower energy centers, thus leaving the mind-body-spirit complex unharvestable and in much need of healing. So here's where some people would probably want to choke me for saying this, but I mean, unless you want to be negative or you want to continue in this wheel of karma, man, I tell you something. I wish the best for his healing, for him, its healing. We don't know. For Hitler's healing. I really wish, as somebody else. I mean, we're all one here. Without jokes aside, and we can laugh about it. But being sincere is the right word. We're all one here. So, incurring into this negative thoughts, we want the best for everybody. So, good for you, Hitler, whatever you're doing right now. I hope you heal, brother. So, before I get more enemies by me praising his healing or helping his healing, Ra continues and says, this entity followed a pattern of negative polarization which suggests the elite and the enslaved, this being seen by the entity to be of a helpful nature for the societal structure. Aha! Great phrase here. However, in drifting from the conscious polarization into what you may call a twilight world, where dream took the place of events in your space-time continuum, this entity fell in its attempt to serve the creator as an harvestable degree along the path of service to self. Pause. Please. Here we see. So, he followed, obviously, a negative path of polarization. We know that because of enslavement and power over others, manipulation, and so on. That we know. Great. But here is where he made a mistake in his negative polarization. He thought this was a helpful thing for the societal structure. If you're negative, you don't help people. You don't think something is helpful. You don't think something is good for other people. That was his mistake. That was his problem. Huge confusion comes out of that because he's trying to polarize towards the negative while at the same time thinking that he can do something good for his people. This is the phrase that defines Hitler's failure to polarize towards the negative and be harvestable. So, because this drifted the consciousness polarization, basically he became delirious, which we know already. Delusional in that sense. And because of that, he failed to serve the creator as a harvestable, entity in the service to self path. So that's why he is struggling still in our astral planes to be healed. So we still have more. I think it's the last part. Yep. Ra says, thus we see the so-called insanity, which may often arise when an entity attempts to polarize more quickly than experience may be integrated. We have advised and suggested caution and patience in previous communications and do so again, using this entity as an example of the over-hasty opening of polarization without due attention to the synthesized and integrated mind-body-spirit complex. To know yourself is to have the foundation upon firm ground. Great lesson to be taken here. All right, so his insanity is due to this, hasty way of trying to polarize towards the negative without paying attention to the personality, who you are. If he would have known who he was and said, "Oh, I am this evil person. Screw everybody else. I'm not here to help him. I'm here to help myself." He would have understood that, then different, thing might have happened. We would have another 4 density being in negative polarization. But he didn't. And now, Ra is saying, and this is where the big lesson comes, we have advised and suggested caution and patience in previous communications basically in the wanting to polarize too fast towards the positive, because this is what happens if you don't know yourself and you start opening your heart and being, oh, I want to be positive. Let's talk about the positive path now. You want to be helpful, you want to be all this stuff. That's what you want. Your willpower is concentrated on that. I want to open my heart. You can have severe problems because you're not integrated, and that's what they say. Without due attention to the synthesized and integrated mind-body-spirit complex. To know yourself is to have the foundation upon firm ground. Many people do this, and they say, I'm here to serve, I'm here to be loving, I have to force myself, and they're not integrating their shadows. They're not integrating, who they are. They are not knowing themselves, and they're trying to skip over these energy centers here, which need to be paid attention, because the energy is concentrating there. The energy is flowing there. And the more you know your red, orange, and yellow, obviously the more you can channel that energy to the green. So whichever way, say, I would have said, I'm gonna go, into a monastery, I'm gonna start chopping wood and help, old people in, poor countries, just because I want to do that, because I think that's going to be, opening the heart. No, instead of that, I get to know myself, and I say in introspection, who am I? What do I like doing? What are the things that define me? What are my orange and yellow ray orientations? That is knowing yourself. Knowing the self is that. And once you know that, then you can say, oh, great. I have an identity that needs to be transcended into the loving aspect of me. That's where we all shine differently. And we don't have to go into, say, a religious cult that says, well, to be good, you have to be this, that. So, you see, there is so much to learn from this that I can go on for hours, probably. Because this is the foundation. This is where we, as the planet, stand right now. This is where we're seeing the struggle unfold. And when I say unfold, is because I don't want to sound like the struggle that has no end. No, the struggle has ended and now is unfolding. It's like we had this tangled mess, and right now we're untangling it. The more we know ourselves, the more we untangle it, and we help others untangle themselves too. So, there's so much to talk about this. But let's continue with this next part, where Don says, thank you. An important example, I believe, and I do believe so. I was wondering if any of those who were subordinate to Adolf at that time were able to polarize in a harvestable nature on the negative path. Ra says, we can speak only of two entities who may be harvestable in a negative sense, others still being in the physical incarnation, that is, in 1981. One known to you as Hermann Göring, the other known as it preferred to be called Himmler. Heinrich Himmler. So these are two entities from the Nazi regime who may be harvestable. Now, I don't know what they mean. I believe they were dead already, otherwise Ra would not have talked about them. But yeah, Hermann Göring, the things that I've heard from Göring, just his trial, the way he presented himself there and the way he just talked about it. You can see a real negative person there in action. It's fascinating. And Himmler. Yes, so these two are possibly, they say, maybe harvestable. So I don't know, if they're still, in the astral planes, or if they had to incarnate again and become evil, more evil. So we may have them here. Who knows? So I don't know what this means. But enough negativity. Let's go to the positive side with Lincoln. Don says, thank you. Earlier we discussed Abraham Lincoln as a rather unique case. Is it possible for you to tell us what the orientation was and why the fourth density being used Abraham's body, and when this took place with respect to the activities that were occurring in our society at that time? We talked about Lincoln before. I forgot the session. but I'll put it here if I remember. I think it was session 24. I don't know. But in any case, just a refresher, Lincoln had at some point what it's called a walk-in, I believe, a visitation, where the entity that was Lincoln at the time left the body, and the other entity, which we'll find out more here from 4 density positive, came and did the rest of the work. So we're going to find out the year, even though I talked about it in that session. I think it was session 24. I don't know. I'll put it up here in a card if I remember. If not, then you can go check it out. In any case, let's... Ra, of course, says, this is possible to talk about Lincoln. So Don says, would it be of value for the reader to know this in your estimation? Ra says, you must shape your queries according to your discernment. This is the loving aspect of Ra. I don't know, I just love it. The contact itself. See, the questions are like, do you think this would be helpful? Ra says, I don't know. It's up to you, man. I'm not going to say anything. See, if Ra would have said like, yes, this is helpful, the extra attention that we would have given to this, the way they talked, Ra, it's so specific, and it's so like they don't leave room for error here. It's like, you ask, we answer, and if it's not infringing upon free will, we'll do it, otherwise we don't. So that's a beautiful part. I don't know, every time I encounter this in the Law of One, the raw material specifically, I think I must make an emphasis. So I did it. So now finally Don says, well, in that case, I would like to know the motivation for this use of Abraham Lincoln's body at that time. And Ra says, this shall be the last query of this session, as we find the instrument quite low in vital energies. The one known as Abraham had an extreme difficulty in many ways, and, due to physical, mental, and spiritual pain, was weary of life, but without the orientation of self-destruction. In your time, 1853, this entity was contacted in sleep by a 4-density being. This being was concerned with the battle between the forces of light and the forces of darkness, which have been waged in 4-density for many of your years. I'm going to make a couple of things here. I'm going to bring out a couple of things from my perspective. But first, let's cover what they say. So, Abraham Lincoln, let's call him Abraham from now on. I like calling people by their first name. We know who he is. So Abe, actually, Abe, just like Gabe, extreme difficulty in his ways. I mean, he was a really nice person. He was a really good person. He had really good intentions. He was a beautiful individual. Not for nothing, he is adored here in the United States. They haven't got rid of the penny because of that, and I think it's a beautiful act. It's a loving act, even though some people may consider, and I considered in the past, that it was stupid, to keep circulating this coin, but now I wish it would just keep circulating, because he was a really good guy. So, and again, my history is really bad, U.S. history. But in any case, he was very tired. He was mentally exhausted about all this stuff, and you can relate to him in terms of how some people feel when they have an awakening of the matrix, the physical world, the elites, the new world order and all this stuff, and their agendas, and you being a pawn in their game. Anyhow, you can relate to that. That's how he felt, but he wasn't suicidal. So in 1853, he was contacted by a 4-density being, positive, we know from that session that I forgot where it is from. And this being, the entity that visited him, was concerned with the battle between the forces of light and darkness. We have talked about this, the battle between the Confederation and the Orion Group. Only in 4 density, there's reasons for that, and that's where my intervention in addition is going to go to. But this entity, or this being, was concerned with that, and I think I'll just make it as part of once I read the whole thing, because there's something to be said, at least from my philosophy of life, in terms of this battle of good and evil that exists, the Armageddon that started. So, okay, so we have more. It's a long answer too. Ra says, this entity accepted the honor duty of completing the one known as Abraham's karmic patterns. And the one known as Abraham discovered that this entity would attempt those things which the one known as Abraham desired to do, but felt it could not. Thus, the exchange was made. The entity, Abraham, was taken to a plane of suspension until the cessation of its physical vehicle, much as though we of Ra would arrange with this instrument to remain in the vehicle, come out of the trance state, and function as this instrument, leaving this instrument minds and spirit complex in its suspended state. Okay, so a couple of things just to clarify how this worked. They mention Abraham too many times. So what happened was that so Abe said, all right, I accept this deal. I go, you come in, you finish my stuff, and this stuff that I can do, so I leave it to you. What else did they say? Discovered this entity could attempt. Yeah, so he said, oh, okay, so you can finish my stuff. You finish my stuff, I'll go in a suspended state. Like they said, that's how it happened, almost like a trance state. And but this entity was able to, live through Abe, and yeah, that's just how it happened. They mentioned, how Carla it's similar, to this. Obviously, an entity from 4 density is not as distant in terms of consciousness like Ra is. So it's easier, and it's supposedly, an entity, just an individual entity, if we can call it that. So yeah, that's the description here. Not much to cover aside from that. Okay, so Ra says, the planetary energies at this time were at what seemed to this entity to be at a critical point. Now they're talking about the entity, not Abraham anymore. For that which you know as freedom had gained in acceptance as a possibility among many peoples. This entity saw the work done by those beginning the democratic concept of freedom, as you call it, in danger of being abridged or abrogated by the rising belief and use of the principle of the enslavement of entities. This is a negative concept of a fairly serious nature in your density. This entity, therefore, went forward into what it saw as the battle for the light, for healing of a rupture in the concept of freedom. Okay, really important thing. And I think if some historians or those historians who are into metaphysics, they would really enjoy this part, or at least historians that are concerned with the benefits of getting rid of slavery back then. Because this, now we're talking about the entity that came over from 4 density into Abe's body, and because of something that I'll explain, once I finish this part, this entity was very concerned, obviously, with what was going on, this war. There was the establishment of the United States here as a power. The potential was huge here. Europe was losing a lot of power there, and U.S. was becoming, the focus for this. And the establishment of slavery here would have determined. Imagine, just take this. Everything that the U.S. has done has been globalized. So if we would have kept slavery, some people say, it would have been done, by this and that. But if not, if this would have been, capitalism, it spread out, right? And in the same way, slavery would have spread out, and we would have a negative planet right now. Notice how Ra uses the word serious when they don't even say serious, they say fairly serious nature in your density. A negative concept of enslavement of entities. The worst, the killing other people is like the ultimate, and doing it obviously with the intention of killing it, like the Nazis did in concentration camps and all these experiments and things for the enjoyment. That is like a huge control, right? And Ra talked about this. But having somebody enslaved is the maximum expression of manipulation and control of anything. Having as a slave, like you are my slave and you'll do whatever I want because I say so. That would have been the key thing. And guess what? It's not like, certain portion of the population would be enslaved. We can see now, because we know that we have been enslaved by a debt system. That's the economy. They couldn't enslave us, physically, so they enslaved us by money, which is fine. I'll take that. But that would have happened here. So this was a key moment in history for our planet to be polarized towards a positive, or at least not polarized towards a negative. And this entity came forward and wanted to contribute to that in the way of democracy, as they were seeing it. And of course, the rest is history. Terrible. All right, so the last part, and then I'll go into my analysis of this, or my contribution. Ross says, this entity did not gain or lose karma by these activities due to its detachment from any outcome. Its attitude throughout was one of service to others, more specifically to the downtrodden or enslaved. The polarity of the individual was somewhat, but not severely, lessened by the cumulative feelings and thought forms which were created due to large numbers of entities leaving the physical plane due to trauma of battle. May we ask if this is the information we requested, or if we may supply any further information? That is the end of the session. And just to go on with this, the entity that they're talking about, I believe, is not Abe, but the 4th density entity that was Abe then, Abe 2.0. So, it didn't, it didn't gain or lose karma due to these activities of detachment. I mean, just whatever outcome happens, that's how we should actually live, or at least that's the, detached way of living. Let's put it that way. I'm not going to say that's how we should live. Its attitude throughout, service to others, of course, more especially, avoiding the enslavement and all that stuff. The polarity was somewhat, but not severely lessened because of the cumulative feelings and thought forms which were created through entities dying. I mean, I don't remember this the quantities of people that died in this civil war, but I mean, it was, I don't know, hundreds of thousands, I believe. Again, history fails here. So there's a lot of trauma there. So there was some loss of polarization there, but no karma. So it's fine. Just more polarization that needs to be worked out, and less karma to deal with. And with this entity who was 4 density, positive, and thanks to that entity. And so now I can go into the analysis, or one contribution. You see, sometimes we would think, when we talk about this war that is going on, we call it a war, battle, between the Confederation and the Orion Group. It's like the forces of good and evil. We as individuals do not need to concern ourselves with that. And this I say from a Buddhist perspective, from a completely detached from reality, reality as the illusion that we live in all densities, completely detached from that. We shouldn't care about that. Let's hope they win. They'll never win. Nobody will win there. It's a constant, tug of war, literally, between the forces of light and darkness. Of course, in this case, it was very helpful. It's not to say like, that entity that came, and helped to get rid of slavery is not. No, obviously, it had an impact. Because of that, we have this. It's just that we, as individuals, should not worry about any tug of war that happens let me rephrase my way. We do not need to be concerned with that, because our nature is oneness, consciousness, pure consciousness. When we are involved in the creation, and this means, from 3rd density to 6th density, as long as we are invested in the creation, then we are concerned with all these things. That's fine. I'm not saying that it's bad. It's just that, from one point of view, we ought to know, or we owe to ourselves to at least know, that we do not belong to this reality in the way it's presented. That we do not belong to one polarity or the other. We belong to the oneness. That's what I'm trying to say. So, with that in mind, I can go to conclusions. I mentioned something that got me really pumped up when we talked about the how we, well, first it started with how we polarize ourselves and how we use experiences, for this. And I think what we use, I'm tempted to go back to that one part when at the end Ron said something beautiful. I think that's the part that gets me really pumped up. To know yourself is to have the foundation upon firm ground. So how we polarize depends on this. Depends on our knowing of the self and then accepting of it. So that's another thing. We may know ourselves, be in conflict with that. If we do not accept ourselves, then we have issues, because the self cannot develop spontaneously without accepting it. And so this is why this phrase is, so important for me. To know yourself is to have the foundation upon firm ground. To know yourself. This is the I am, philosophy. This is the reality of the self. The more you know who you are, what you are, because it's not who implies, manyness, but what you are, then the more you can allow this to flow, because you're not in control. And this is, from this very deep perception, you can see that you are not in control of anything. You are a flowing of something that will not define. Okay? And we call it the self, the I am. So that flowing cannot fully flow if you are in constant battle. If you let the ego obviously be around you and be bombarding you all the time. So this is, to me, the most important part of all of this information. It's just to know all this stuff, to see how it applies to you as the free-flowing creator that you are. Because, and again, I'll go back to that battle between, in fourth density. It's a futile battle that exists there, because in fifth density, everybody realizes oh, that's unnecessary. But you have to become wise to see that. Well, guess what? You don't have to go to fourth density to figure that out. You can see it here. This is a mini representation of the same fourth density battle. It's a lot more real, or it seems more real, but this is why Gautama Siddhartha is the Buddha, is so revered for that. Realized oh, I call it the shortcut, just to to graduation, or to unity, consciousness. That's it. You all you need is to realize who you are, and then you're oh, okay, all of this is an aspect of myself. I can see it and I can enjoy it. I can live it. I don't need to be, disassociated with it, because I am that. So, there's so much to go through here, but to point out the conclusion is that, to know yourself. Don't try to accelerate your process. This goes against the principle of Wu Wei in the Tao, of forcing something. You cannot force. This is the result of forcing, what they said, in question 35.4, that you can become Hitlerized by just going confused and all delirious by thinking that you have to be one way, as opposed to just relax, see what flows, who you are, and accept it all the time. So, all right, with that, that's the end of session 35. Like I said, it was very short, so no part 2. Session 36 is longer, so we're gonna have to cover it in 2 parts as usual. We get into higher self, parallel universes, or parallel realities. We have more information about Himmler and Göring, I think. So, it's all over the place. It's good info as usual. As we can see, even with historical stuff that even I'm not very, seduced by, there's still some stuff that we can get out from the Law of One. Ra speaks from a very higher consciousness perspective. So, everything that they say, we can extract something that is helpful, that is enlightening for us, and that can help us, follow that path that we're all following. Because there's only one path, and it's to unity. And with that in mind, thank you so much for watching as usual, and I'll see you in session 36.